All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Here Brotherhood podcast. Today we have a friend of ours, Hunter Clark, who he has a rich history in a lot of things. I know him personally just from the last couple of years, but especially the last couple of months. And we just want to give you a warm welcome and would love to just hear a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're here.
Yeah. I grew up in Utah. So grew up in Heber City, and
Let's go.
Yes, Heber City for John. And I've been working in sales for the last 6 years, summer sales, and we can kind of dive into it. But during my whole life, I've kind of had a struggle with pornography, and I think it specifically got pretty bad during sales, and also being around, those who aren't familiar with summer sales, you're with hundreds of young guys in their 20s. And I realized how many men struggle with it that I was around. And I started to open up about it. And I think that's why I'm on this podcast, is because I'm actually willing to talk about it, tell my story when I feel like most people are pretty hesitant to open up. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Love it. So tell us a little bit about, and maybe it's good to just dive right in. Just kind of getting to where you are now. I'm interested to go back a little bit. Where did this all start? Where your desire to help others in this and starting to open up. Tell us that process. Tell us that story of.
Yeah, well, I'll give you guys the whole story.
Yeah,
and I feel like my story is very similar to a lot of others, unfortunately. But my story started out when I was pretty young. I was like 7, 8 years old, like stealing my mom's like magazines that had like underwear catalogs in it, just like so innocent.
Yeah.
And things started to kind of take a shift when I got my first iPod Touch. I was 10 years old. It was 2007. That's when the first iPod Touches came out and the first iPhones. So really it was the first time in history that internet was on your phones. Like before, you guys probably remember the Blackberries and the whole, there wasn't really, other than your computer, you didn't really have internet access. So 2007 was a big moment. And I remember watching Transformers 1 with my dad. You guys probably remember. And Megan Fox comes on and just like she was the star of the show. And it definitely like sparked something inside of me. And that night I remember looking up like Megan Fox and bikini videos, something like that. Just very like innocent. And that's kind of what started the journey of pornography. And what started out as like curiosity slowly turned into a coping mechanism because, as everybody knows, it's such a surge in dopamine. You feel really good when you do it. So I started to notice through middle school that my pattern from curiosity turned into coping. So anytime something bad would happen, I'm just like regular middle schooler. We've all been there. Like we're all trying to fit in, figure out our bodies. We're all going through puberty. It's weird. It's a weird time for us.
Time.
Yeah, it's a
socially very challenging years.
Because everything is awkward about it. Honestly.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So, I started struggling with it in middle school. I would say is kind of when it first really started to kind of show up in my life. And
can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Just for context, was there sort of a belief or perception around pornography in general that you had been taught or that you had learned about? Like, was it sort of like, hey, this is bad, or oh, it's just boys will be boys and it's normal, or like what was kind of what was your understanding of it around these years? Do you recall?
If I remember correctly, I remember like when it was really innocent, like Walmart catalog underwear stuff like that didn't feel like super bad to me. Like
Right.
I was more like curious. I think when it started to kick in was in middle school is when I started to cope with it.
Using it as, yeah.
That's when I started to feel bad. And then that's when the culture, I'd say church culture, started to put a lot of shame around it. And to be clear, I have nothing bad to say about the church because, again, this is a very new thing for the church to be handling. They didn't know how big it was actually going to get. So
I don't think anybody did, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of been a shock to everybody.
I think
how quickly it's become so mainstream.
Yeah, and if you like look at the stats of pornography usage, it's like an exponential curve around 2000 or 2010, like right when internet started to come out, and I think
in the handheld devices. Yeah.
That's when
in every household. Yeah.
That's when it really started to like become huge. So although the church did put some shame on me, I have no blame for them at all because they didn't know how to handle this. This was all new. And like you're going to bishops that have no idea what it is, right? So yeah, there definitely was some shame that I felt myself and then shame from culturally of it. You'd hear things like Relief Society presidents talking about never to marry a guy that's looked at pornography and, just stuff like that. And if you look at pornography, there's something wrong with you or there's something off. Like just little comments like that kind of made me feel a lot of shame, which that will tie later into the story. But at one point in middle school, I felt super depressed, I would say, because I felt like I was the only one struggling with it. Like,
because so much secrecy around.
Yeah, no other kid is going through what I'm going through, right? And I feel like I hit puberty a little bit earlier than all my friends, so maybe I actually was one of the first ones to kind of dive into it. But when I kind of got into high school is when it became more mainstream. It became more of a joke between the friends. And
was that in some ways a little bit of a relief to you to be like, I'm not the only one, even if we're joking about it?
Sure, for sure. And weirdly enough, I actually didn't struggle with it as bad in high school. And I think that was because it was just like less shamed. Like it was like, oh yeah, everybody does it, like whatever. But the whole idea in high school was like, oh yeah, I struggle with this, but when I go on my mission, my church mission, I'll get rid of it.
I'm good.
Like a couple months before, I'll go to the bishop, I'll repent, do the whole thing. And when it got to that point, little did I know I actually dug myself into a hole of addiction.
Yeah.
And it was much harder to get out than I expected. And my bishop was really cool. He was like, hey, no matter what, we're going to send you out on this date. Do the best you can until then, which was like so relieving of like not this pressure of like you have to be perfect to go on your mission.
Yeah.
So I was able to willpower a couple of months and totally white knuckle, like totally avoid. And I got on my mission in Mexico and served for 2 years. Didn't have an issue with it. I would say mostly because I had a walnut phone with my companion. We just had like the little flip phones.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I was on my mission. I'm like, sweet, like it's gone. Like we overcame it. Like it's over. And then I came back from my mission and got a smartphone again. And it's kind of the story of like Pavlov's dogs. Have you guys heard about that? When they ring the bell, they salivate. It was like when I finally had a phone with internet and I would feel negative emotions, it was like the bell was ringing again. And my brain was just like salivating for pornography. So it didn't take long to fall back into my habit. And that's when I really felt a lot of shame. Because I was like, return missionaries, like, bro, they don't struggle with this. That's kind of when it was like the middle school, like isolated depression kind of came back after my mission. Felt very alone. I dated a couple girls and like things were going good, but I never told them about pornography. And I told myself I would never get married until I overcame it completely. And I actually broke up with a few girls because of this, because I was like, things are getting more serious and I'm still in the thick of this. So I would break things off with these girls. Now looking back, I know they weren't the ones I was supposed to marry, but at this point I would go to my bishop and I would just be like, hey, like, I'm really struggling. Like, what is going on? He's like, you got to pray harder. You got to read your scriptures. You got to go to the temple. And I'm like, I'm a temple worker. I'm working there every single week. I'm reading my scriptures and I'm praying. And it's not that wasn't helping me, but it just wasn't like solving the issue is kind of what I felt. So then after a few years of dating, I met my now wife, Sarah, and things just felt right at the very beginning. And I was still struggling with pornography. And my thought process was, hey, when I get married, that's when it'll go away, right? You know, like I'll be able to have sex with my wife. Like I won't need to go search for pornography, right? So I wasn't going to tell my wife because I was like, my last relationships broke off because of this. I'm not going to tell her. And my dad, he's kind of in my corner at this point with all of this. I've been pretty open with him. And he was just like, hey, you need to talk to Sarah. And I'm just like, but Dad, what if she breaks up with me? Like, she's the love of my life. Like, I want to marry her. And he's like, that's the consequences that you need to deal with. I was like, dang, but it felt right. You know, like it felt right what he was saying. So I told Sarah very early on in our relationship, like a few weeks into dating. And it wasn't roses and daisies, but there was some sympathy there from her. She definitely, it was hard, but
it wasn't like game over.
It wasn't game over because I think the way that I approached it, and I was actively like doing things to progress in this area. So I was able to come to her with evidence of like, hey, this is my struggle, but like, here's what I'm doing. Like I paid for a professional coach. I've done this, I've done that. Like I'm really trying because with or without you, I don't want this in my life.
Right.
So I think with that kind of a stage set when I told her, I think it definitely helped.
Yeah.
And I still had the idea. I was like, oh yeah, once I get married, we'll have sex. Don't need to go to porn. Anyways, that's what I thought. So then we got married and things were great. Like the first 8 months, the honeymoon phase, as we've all probably been through, didn't really struggle with it. Like, and I thought to myself, I was like, oh, sweet.
Yeah.
All I needed to do was get married, you know, like that was the solution.
Yeah.
And then it started to come back slowly after 8 months into a year of marriage. And this is when I felt like terrible. When I told Sarah the first time about pornography, I told her, I was like, hey, I can't promise you that I'll be perfect, but I do promise I'll always be open and honest with you about it. So that's what I told her. So 8 months into marriage, I have my first relapse. So I'm like, okay, well, now I got to go tell Sarah. And she wasn't expecting it either. She was expecting that I was going to be over it because of all this. And it's really hard for her. And I think the high pressure sales job that I was in too just kind of contributed to a downfall almost. Like it was like the next year and a half, like really just like got bad. And it became more frequent. I was going to the temple, I was doing all my things, but I truly think sales contributed to it a lot because I was in a very high stressful situation. And there was one moment, me and my wife, we have a Sprinter van, we sold it, but we were driving to California or something, and I was in the back on the mattress, no seatbelt. It's all like built out in the back. And she's driving because I drove forever and she was taking a few hours so I could take a nap in the back. And I remember just like not being able to sleep and just like staring at the ceiling of the Sprinter van. And there was a moment where we're going 85 miles per hour and she hits the rumble strips. And normally, you know, you're in the back of a van and you can like feel all the movements and you feel the rumble strips, like you'd get really scared. But in that moment when she hit the rumble strips, I was like, if she went off the road and the van rolled, I would for sure be dead. Like there's no way I would survive a crash back here. And it almost felt like a relief of like,
Yeah.
I was like, I've never like thought about committing suicide, but the thought of like getting in a car accident was like, oh, easy way out, you know, like I don't need to commit suicide and my struggle would be over. Right. And that's when I realized I kind of took a step back. I was like, holy crap, like this is affecting me way more than I thought it was mentally. And I remember that year in sales, I had made the most money I had ever had. And I remember thinking I would trade every penny to get rid of this habit. And then at that moment, I'm like, there's no way that I'm the only one in these shoes right now. Like, there's no freaking way. And so at that point, Sarah was very supportive, but it became very frequent. The mess ups, the slip ups, the relapses. And after one specifically, I remember she was like, hey, I've been so supportive to you and like I love you, but I don't know how much longer I can do this. And she's never like threatened divorce or like, hey, if you mess up again, we're getting divorced. But I think just from her shoes, she was just like, I don't know how much longer I can take this.
Well, and it sounded like, I mean, you're both feeling hopeless, and
Totally.
you're both feeling like there's no solution, like there's no way out, which is, you know, why you had those thoughts. And it's crazy to hear how often that that story happens, where it's like they have the best desires and they have all the intentions to stop, but they're just so stuck in it.
Totally.
I mean, those are the chains of addiction.
Totally.
And it's so common. It's so sad to hear you going through those thoughts, and just so many people that get to that point of no hope. And so then you're being met with hopelessness from your wife as well. And I can't imagine how that could have added to that, right? You're both feeling it at the same time.
Totally.
It's a lot.
It was. It was definitely probably my lowest point of my life, I would say, for sure. And this is kind of when things started to take a turn for the better, though, without me even really realizing it. Because I always thought, I was like, the way I'm going to overcome this is I'm going to like grip it and I'm going to like totally just powerhouse through this and not look at it. Like willpower was my solution to this all. And I had heard something from someone, I can't remember who said it, but they talked about talking about your addiction. Simply just talking about like your struggles actually helps you overcome. And at this point in my life, my parents knew, my wife knew, and I think like one or two buddies knew. And at this point, I was in my sales community and I started to open up about it to like my teams. Like I'd be giving like a correlation to my teams and I would actually talk about it. And I would talk about it in a way of like, hey, I'm not perfect. This is something I struggle with, because I knew like at least 70 to 80% of the room that I was talking to was struggling with it as well, based off stats, right?
Yeah.
And I just started talking about it. And although it like wasn't the key to my success, like things got better. And I think the reason for that is because when you hide something, and someone gives you love, it's almost like a bucket with holes in it. Because the thought is, if they knew who I truly was or what I was doing, they wouldn't love me, right?
Mhm.
So anything, if you guys were giving me love, it would just like fall through the bucket. I learned this from Jimmy Rex. And when you can truly be seen for who you are, you're like covering those holes in that bucket. So when people give you love, you can actually accept the love within yourself because you're fully seen. You're not hiding anything. And so that was like a big like step in progression, and it didn't solve the problem, right? But definitely like pornography usage was for sure declining in frequency, and I was feeling a lot better about it. I knew people still loved me, even though what I was doing. And
Which is such an amazing, freeing feeling to have when you're seen completely and they still love me. You know, it's
Totally.
it's the most incredible feeling.
yeah, I can't remember who said it, but they said true intimacy is being fully seen and fully loved
Mm.
is true intimacy.
Mm.
And I think that is what was so unique about my journey with my wife is like I was being fully seen from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And as I started opening up about this and talking to other men about it, men would come up to me and be like, "Hey, I've been dealing with this for 5 years and I've never told anyone." And these are guys that have been married for 5 years.
Mm.
I'm like, could you imagine that burden of like struggling with it and like not opening up about it? And that's kind of when I started to feel this call of like, hey, I don't know how to overcome this, but if I can get guys to at least open up to their wives about it, I will make a huge dent in their progression. If I can just get them into integrity, even though I'm not perfect,
Right.
if I can get them integrity, they're making a lot of progress. So at this point, although I wasn't perfect, and I had that thing in my mind of my wife saying, I don't know how much longer I can take this, and I was still having slip-ups. They were less frequent, but I was still feeling it, is kind of when plant medicine kind of came into play. And I want to be really careful how I talk about this because this is not me encouraging anybody to do anything like this. This was simply just my story.
Mm-hmm.
But my wife and I, she follows this girl on her podcast that she went and did like ayahuasca. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what that is, but you go into the jungle of Colombia and you're taking a drug, and apparently it's really crazy and can be very spiritual for a lot of people.
This is a psychedelic, right?
Psychedelic, yeah. And we listened to her podcast about her ayahuasca, and she's like fighting dragons and the jungles of Colombia, and I'm like, what the freak is this? Like, it was more of an inside joke for my wife and I.
Sure.
Of just like, hey, like it's very funny and like very interesting to listen to this stuff. So I was just listening to it on and off about people's experiences, mostly in like a comedic setting.
Yeah.
Like it was funny, it was just a joke. But every so often you would hear like spiritual experiences. Very, very spiritual experiences. And then Jimmy Rex did a podcast with a bishop, a current LDS bishop. I don't know if you guys heard it or listened to it, but Utah was in the mix of deciding whether to legalize psychedelics for therapeutic use or not. And so they actually had one of the state legislators who was currently a bishop actually go and experience. I don't know if they sent him or if it was just his own thing that he went and did it, but he had a very powerful experience and felt, he said, the Savior's love during his experience. And that, and the way he explained it, he's like, it didn't take away from anything that I have with my church and my religion. It only just added to it. Like I was just able to feel God's love through these substances. And at that point I was like, my biggest hesitation to doing it was like, I'm LDS. I've never been drunk. I've never been high. I don't do that stuff. Right. But there were some studies that came out about addiction, breaking addiction, and cigarette addiction, alcohol addiction. There's no like pornography addiction, but I was like, addiction is kind of the same canal, right? Like if you're addicted to pornography, alcohol, or drugs, like it's kind of the same thing. You're coping with negative emotions. And that's when I decided to go for it, because I had that thought of like, I don't know how much longer my wife will last with this, so I'm desperate. And I went into it, and I had some really, really powerful experiences that I don't want to go into too much detail about, but I think the main takeaway from it was it helped me heal a lot of trauma and a lot of shame from my past. And you guys did a podcast with Clay Olson, and he said, I think he had like 8 things that help with pornography. And one of them stuck out to me. It was like healing past trauma was one of his things. And so as I was able to heal some past trauma through these substances, which I also do think I could have gotten the same results through therapy. I think it would have took a little bit longer, but I think therapy, and if you do those substances in the right settings, are kind of the same
Sure.
thing, in my opinion. But yeah, so I got back, and I wasn't struggling with pornography. I was doing amazing. And when I got back, I was like, had this crazy idea of I want to open up on social media about it. I was like, what the, like, who would like no one talks about their personal story about pornography on social media, but I felt called to it. So I wanted to tell all of my family before I opened up on social media, because I didn't want them to be blindsided.
Yeah.
Especially my parents-in-law, which
Oh boy.
was like the final boss, right?
Yeah.
Final boss.
And at this point, I'm doing amazing. I felt really good. And so I go tell my parents-in-law about this struggle. And not to go into detail, but they said some pretty hurtful things. And I don't blame them for what they said, because I think they have a view of what pornography is. Because it feels like everybody has that second distant cousin or friend that's a pervert that got in a divorce from pornography. It's like, I feel like everybody has that story.
Sure.
And that's what they knew. So they're like, oh my gosh, my daughter just married one of those guys, right?
Yeah.
And this is when I correlated my usage to shame, because I felt a lot of shame from them. And that's when I actually fell back into it. I made all this progress, and they just like hit me across the face with shame. Again, I don't blame them, but that's when I correlated the two of like shame and my pornography usage are very correlated together. And then that's when I could go back about your question, Mike, was, do you feel like shame was involved? And that's kind of when I started to understand like, holy crap, it was. My whole journey was about shame. And at this point, I had a coach or a therapist who, she was like, why do you view pornography as bad? And I was like, She's like, because there's some people that look at it and totally accept it. And like, I'm not trying, she said, I'm not trying to change your perspective, but like, why is it bad? And I'm just like, because it just doesn't, because it's bad, you know, like culturally, like it's the worst thing ever. It's the Black Plague, you know, it's the worst. And she's like, no, like think about it. Like, why is it bad? And she really challenged me on not looking at pornography as neither good, like beneficial, or neither bad with shame. Just to look at it as like neutral. Kind of like if you look at McDonald's, like if you have fitness goals, it's not that McDonald's is bad. And it's not that the people that go to McDonald's that are bad people, or the people that work at McDonald's are bad people. It's just, don't do it because it's bad. Don't stop doing it because it's bad. Stop doing it because it no longer makes an accurate representation of who you are. I was like, holy crap. And it like totally, something shifted inside of me of not viewing pornography as like this bad, evil thing, but as just something that's kind of lame, to be honest. Like if you think about it, like true intimacy, what is true intimacy? And intimacy with your spouse is crying, laughing, dancing, having sex, long conversations, picking up dog throw up and poop everywhere
Right.
from the baby, right? Like
The
that.
good, the bad, and the ugly.
That's all of it combined, and that's what makes true intimacy, in my opinion. And if you just look at pornography as a whole, it's like it's none of that. All it is just like the perfect like sexual orgasm, and it's like, dude, it's kind of actually lame if you really can like look at it from a long-term perspective. And that's when like my desire just started to go down. Like I was like, hey, I can go look at pornography if I want to. I could go right now. Like I could go into the bathroom right now and do my thing. But just when I think about it, it's no longer like this, oh, I gotta avoid it, temptation. It's just like, it's kind of lame. Like I would rather be with my spouse and
Have a real
have
connection,
a real
experience.
Yeah, exactly. Like a real connection with someone. I was craving a real connection. I was searching through pornography. When I was able to not look at it as good or bad, I was like, wait, this is not what I want at all. Just like the McDonald's. Like if I'm trying to get fit, McDonald's isn't bad. It just doesn't align with me right now. And that was kind of like the big, big turning point for me. And yeah.
It no longer became this forbidden, like, well, maybe secretive, I don't know. But yeah, there's something about our psychology where if something is like, oh, don't look at that, or you can't have that,
The
or
forbidden
whatever.
fruit.
Yeah, it is. Like, why? I don't fully understand that, but there is it's easy to develop almost an obsession over the thing that is forbidden or whatever. That's interesting. And then I just wanted to comment on one of the things you said earlier about just that change, that reframe, that change of perspective, which is connected, right? It's like, I'm no longer going to look at this as this thing that I want that I can't have or that I shouldn't do, right?
Yeah.
But just looking at it as for what it is, which is like kind of a cheap substitute for real connection or
100%.
And I've listened to Jennifer Finlayson Fife a bit.
I love her.
You familiar?
Yeah, I love her.
She kind of approaches it in a similar way from a few little things I've heard here and there. But she kind of, I think she made the metaphor of like, it's like, eating Cheetos or something. It's like, oh, you want the Cheetos? Or like there's a whole banquet buffet of like real nourishing, substantial stuff. And like, here's the Cheetos. And you're like, going for the Cheetos? That's kind of lame. Kind of in the similar way that you said. But it also kind of takes away it's not like, oh, you're going to eat the poison, that's going to kill you or whatever. It's just like, it's not nourishing. It's not beneficial. It's not going to kill you, but it's like, oh, there's such better things available to you that'll actually fill the needs that you do have in a meaningful way, right? Not this counterfeit version. And so I've appreciated some of those perspectives, and I love the way that you shared yours. So thank you.
Yeah.
And I think going back to shame too, we have a friend Mitch who's introduced me to this grace model, and it's the antithesis of shame, which is going back to the choice, kind of what you're saying, where you say, I actually don't have to do anything that I don't want to do. It's anytime you say, I have to, I should, I'm supposed to, all those things that bring an obligation into us where we're then focused so much on, I have to do it, but I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
You're so focused on that rather than saying, okay, let's switch it around and say, I actually can do it if I want to, because I have agency, or I don't have to.
Yeah.
But going from shame to grace puts it back in our hands. And he uses an example of like changing a baby's diaper. Like, I don't have to change this baby's diaper, this baby's poopy diaper. I don't have to. However, I know that this baby's going to have a rash and have issues if I don't do that.
Yeah.
And so instead of getting past the like, I have to do this because I'm the dad or whatever, rather than that, I look at it and say, you know what? I don't have to do that. I don't have to change that baby's diaper. And I love this baby so much. I don't want them to have a rash on their bum. So out of love, I'm going to do that. And so it's kind of this walkthrough that's been so helpful for me, just removing shame from anything. Shame of should have, coulda, should have, have to, all of those times we use that language. And I think it applies to any type of addiction, any type of thing where there's shame surrounding it is, I actually can do that thing.
Yeah.
But it's not going to serve me. It actually is going to maybe harm some of the intimacy that I have with my wife
Yeah.
or the relationships that I have with other people. Okay, so because of that, I don't want to anymore.
Totally.
And so I think it just goes along with what you're saying of just giving yourself grace and doing everything possible to remove that shame.
Yeah.
And then I think you can move into freedom and into choice rather than obligation. It then moves to choice. And
Yeah.
we all want to have a choice. Nobody wants to be told what to do. Nobody wants to feel like they're obligated to do things. And
Yeah.
so it moves into the power of choice, and I get
Totally.
to choose.
Now, I would add 2 more things to my journey to get to the point where I don't necessarily desire it anymore, which is crazy. I never thought that I would be able to say that. And it's kind of hard to explain. It's not like I'm like don't have any like sexual thoughts, right? Because that's different. Like those are normal.
Sure.
But right now, at least right now, for a while, it's been just I just like don't care to. Like it's lame. Like I'd rather have the true connection. But 2 things I would add is I don't put a pressure on myself to be perfect.
Mm.
I don't know why but whenever I talk to guys about this, they're just like, all right, this is my last time. This was the last relapse. I'm never going to mess up again.
Mhm.
And then they go 30, 90, however many days. And I just feel like guys put so much pressure on themselves to be perfect in this area.
Mhm.
When in every area of our lives, except for this one, we can be imperfect. But with this specific thing, we have to be perfect, right? So one, allowing myself like, hey, I'm not perfect. If I have a slip up in the future, I'm going to tell my wife, I'm going to move on. Period. End of story. That's it. And taking that pressure off myself has really like helped me
Mhm.
in my progress. And then the last thing, well, a couple of things I'd say is looking back on my journey when I was looking at the underwear catalogs and I looked up Megan Fox and through high school, I think it's very important to understand that there's nothing wrong with you. You were a kid in a candy store eating candy. Of course, you wanted to look up girls. You're curious. It's a natural thing to want. And I don't see my journey as like Satan overcoming me in my younger years of making me look up pornography. I view it as a very natural part of my progression. Would I have rather not looked up pornography and maybe had something not as crazy as internet pornography? Yes, but I don't view like there's something wrong with me. And to any viewers who are still struggling with this, it's like, dude, there is nothing wrong with you. There's no chemical imbalance in your brain. They've actually done studies. There is nothing wrong with you, period. It's just you simply don't have the right tools yet to overcome it. So be patient with yourself is kind of the underlying message I'd want to shove down everyone's throats. It's like, dude, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, stop thinking like there is. And that's what I love so much about Here Brotherhood is really my first step in progression was bringing it to the light, talking about it, talking about my feelings, talking about my struggles. And I think it really aligns with what you guys do at Here is from my knowledge, you guys create a container, create a space where men can open up about this type of stuff. They can open up about other things. And I believe the only way to heal something is to bring it to the light and to really like look at it and let it be seen. And so,
Well, and I think the first step to any type of transformation is awareness, and awareness with yourself and the situation, and awareness with others.
yeah.
Bringing that to light. So with the little time that we have left, I'd love to hear, with this incredible story that you have, what are you currently doing and planning on doing to help others with their struggle,
Yeah.
with their experience?
I think 2 main things is I am a student right now. Like addiction is a very complex addiction or habit, however you want to say it, is a very complex thing. And I view my journey right now as a student. I think I'll always be a student, honestly. But I think if I can do 2 things, if I can, 1, get rid of the shame, make it more of a conversation that people talk about it more and people can open up. And 2, if people can talk to their spouse about it, it's like, I feel like if you do those two things, you've done 80% of the work that you need to do to get rid of this habit. So those are the two things I'm focusing on right now. I'm playing with the idea of creating a company called Sunlight, and that goes back to
Bringing to the light.
bring
Cool.
to the light whatever you want to heal. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm just posting a lot on Instagram. I do a little bit of group programming where I get like 8 guys, and every week we meet and we're not focused. It's not like an accountability. We're not like trying to get X amount of days. We're really just bringing it to the light, talking about our feelings, talking about past traumas, to really, rather than avoiding it, getting to the place of not desiring it anymore. And that takes time.
So how do people get to know this program? Or where do they find you? Where do they find these programs?
I would say that
Because I know you're on school too, right? You have a
I'm on
community
school.
there.
Yeah, I have a school community called Unashamed. It's a free community. It has a free course on there, just everything that I've learned. And anyone can join that. And then on my Instagram, it's Hunter Clark. I think it's Hunter_Hunter.Clark is my handle.
Wait, say that again.
Underscore
Hunter Clark.
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 Okay. Underscore
I need to double
Hunter
check that. 'Cause I'm going
Clark.
to give the wrong thing.
We'll put it in the
They'll
show
find you.
notes.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, that's where I post like, hey, I'm opening up another group this month.
Cool.
It's like a 3-month thing, and I'm
Cool.
gonna try and do one every month. Open up a new one every month. So
Cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I appreciate the perspective that you are bringing to this that is maybe different than a lot of, some of the resources that are out there that are a little more about just like, avoid and counting days and et cetera. And I like that your approach is not about that, but it's about changing your relationship to the struggle. And it's what does it reveal about ourselves? Like, oh, there's some trauma here. Let's address that.
totally.
There's some perfectionism or expectation of like, that has to be the last time or whatever. And what if you let go of that burden and just be, and then, wow, actually the relief that comes from that maybe is part of the healing, right?
Totally.
Like that. I love all the things that you shared. And I just appreciate you being willing to open up and talk about your story and the learnings along the way.
I have one thing to add to that reminded me. Is I went to a BYU like club. I don't remember what the club was called, but some guy was talking about his pornography journey. He's like 45, 50, talking about his pornography. And it was really cool to hear. But something fell off about it because he was like, hey, I'm 700 and something days clean from pornography. And he's like, I need to show up every single day on my A game. I can't have social medias on my phone. All Instagram, Facebook, everything is off my phone. I have blockers on my Chrome. And I was just like, oh my gosh, is that what it's going to have to be for me? Like, that sounds miserable. It doesn't sound like you're free from this at all. Although you have the 700 days, it does not sound like you're free at all from this. So that's what really challenged my idea of like, okay, is the current addiction recovery model the right model? I don't know. But for me, it's not. For me, there's a much freer, easier, it's way, way, way easier to change your relationship with pornography than to try and avoid it, in my opinion. Yeah. And that's the message that I'm trying to get across.
Love it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And we have, there's many different places to find you. You talked about Instagram. Is there a website, anywhere else that we can go to find you before?
Not yet. I'm new. I'm
cool.
still trying to figure this all out. And I'd just say the main thing is my Instagram right now is where I talk about almost everything.
Amazing. Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing your story, your journey with us today.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Right on.